So, did anyone else hear that Taika Waititi's soccer movie finally came out? Based on the low box office numbers, you probably didn't. Unless you're one of that small handful of Our Flag Means Death fans who didn't actually see the movie, but who did post about the promotion Taika Waititi and Rhys Darby were doing together for it. So, speaking as one of the 12 people who have actually seen this movie, allow me to reassure you, you're not missing very much. The characters are boring, almost all the jokes tank, and the trans stuff is underbaked. But I wasn't even really surprised that the movie was bad. It had a strangely limited theatrical run and literally nobody was talking about it. Plus, Taika Waititi has historically been a critical darling, and suffice to say, the critical response to Next Goal Wins was not good. It was, in fact, the worst. Next Goal Wins has the lowest critic score on Rotten Tomatoes that any Taika Waititi movie has ever made, marking the new low of what has already become a downward slope. So I had reason to suspect that something had probably gone awry. However, even going in not expecting much, I was still a little baffled by the movie itself. It's not just how far the mighty have fallen, and have they fallen, but that looking at this movie on paper, Next Goal Wins should have been a slam dunk. I mean, this movie was supposed to be Taika Waititi's big return to form after spending the last few years directing big-budget superhero movies, writing absurdist anti-fascist historicals, and acting in ultimately doomed pirate rom-coms. It was certainly marketed like it was going to be another one of those great indie movies like the ones he made his name making. It's pretty clear that Next Goal Wins was pretty deliberately crafted to have all the right ingredients to be a movie like that, to be something great, or at least something reasonably charming. In fact, I'd say there's one movie in particular from Taika Waititi's back catalog that Next Goal Wins really wanted to be. And it's not hard to see why, because that particular movie is, in my opinion, the best movie Taika Waititi has ever made. Hunt for the Wilderpeople is the movie that Taika Waititi made just before he blew up really big on the worldwide stage with Thor Ragnarok. And I really do mean barely just. Wilderpeople got its North American release in June of 2016, and then Ragnarok came out in October. In other words, only 4 months later. So it sometimes seems like maybe Wilderpeople got lost in the shuffle, because I feel like Wilderpeople is, if perhaps not underrated, it's certainly under-discussed. I mean, pretty much every film channel on YouTube made a video about Ragnarok when it came out. Meanwhile, the overwhelming majority of video essays about Wilderpeople are just uploaded school projects, and all at least 7 years old. But I suppose not all of his earlier movies can be reanimated back into cultural relevance with a spin-off show that he is barely involved with. So, in case you missed it, Hunt for the Wilderpeople follows Ricky Baker, a troubled Maori kid from the city, and his cantankerous old foster father as the two flee into the Aotearoan bush in the attempt to avoid the authorities after they become the subject of a national manhunt. Adventure and found family ensues. Now, apart from some of the more eclectic details, this kind of story probably sounds a little familiar to you if you've played any AAA video games from the past decade or so. But there's a good reason for that. As ever, this kind of framework of a road movie mixed with found family and a bit of peril serves as a really good blank canvas for creative storytelling, and this is some creative storytelling. It's a very retro kind of movie, specifically it's quite 80s and 90s with a distinct splash of Spielberg. But it's also got kind of a grab bag of all the genres at once. Some action over here, some cat and mouse over there. The result is a really delightful mishmash plot that still manages to keep the bulk of the focus on the characters where it belongs. Because make no mistake, Heck and Ricky are the beating heart of this movie. That's due in no small part to the actors who breathe such life into the characters and bring real chemistry to their relationship. Like, genuinely, I think this is my favorite performance I've ever seen Sam Neill give. Yes, I think even more than Alan Grant, though arguably casting him in a similar adoptive father role is another Spielberg homage. Because while Jurassic Park is a great movie, it doesn't have the world's most robust character writing. Wilderpeople, however, gives him a lot more to sink his teeth into. He balances Heck's gruff exterior with vulnerability so well, and it's wonderful watching his character slowly open up throughout the film. Plus, he plays a really excellent straight man to Julian Dennison as Ricky, happily letting him steal the spotlight every chance he gets. Believe it or not, Hunt for the Wilderpeople was not actually Julian Dennison's first role in a Taika Waititi directed project. In 2013, he appeared in a viral PSA Taika Waititi directed about drug driving, playing in direct reference to Two Cars One Night, because black and white comedy shorts about kids sitting in cars while waiting for their parents was apparently a niche he'd gotten pretty comfortable and successful with back then. It was on the basis of that Taika Waititi offered him the role of Ricky without the need to audition, which makes sense. Even in something so short, it's easy to see that Julian Dennison, as young as he was, had a real skill for comedic timing and for saying the word sucks. I was kind of stunned when I found out that Julian Dennison was 12 during the filming of Wilderpeople. 12! And he comfortably carried so much of that movie all by himself. He's an adult now and still acting, and I wish him an extremely fruitful career. His line delivery and facial expressions are so charming in Wilderpeople and render Ricky so specifically as a really genuinely sweet kid, even if that isn't how he appears at first. Ricky is introduced to his foster mother Bella, and by extension us as the audience, as
apparently he's a bit of a handful, real bad egg.
In his opening scenes, he's sullen and standoffish, acting every inch the archetype of the troubled urban youth, complete with a wannabe gangster rapper aesthetic and a long list of his repeated run-ins with petty crime.
Throwing rocks, kicking stuff, defacing stuff, burning stuff, loitering and graffitiing. And that's just the stuff we know about.
It's so on the nose it's almost cliche, so it's practically a foregone conclusion when he packs up to run away in the middle of the night. However, the cracks in his shell, so to speak, start to show very quickly as it's revealed that he is nowhere near as tough or as streetwise as he leads people to believe. His little lone wolf escape attempt is not only an immediate and stupendous failure when he somehow manages to get lost only 200 meters away from the farm, but was in fact anticipated by Bella, which reveals that her friendly and unassuming demeanor might have been similarly misleading. As her and Ricky start to spend more time together, it becomes increasingly clear that for both of them, first impressions were far from the whole picture. Ricky's hardened image is less that of an earnestly written cliche and more of a defense mechanism projected by a nice kid after being serially rejected by all of his previous foster families. Meanwhile, Bella, who later grins blithely while wiping boar blood off her face, is in fact hard as nails underneath all her smiles. This process of presenting well-worn archetypes and then breaking them down and subverting our initial expectations to reveal fully nuanced characters underneath really effectively endears us to both of them, as she and Ricky quickly find common ground because of the incongruities in their characters. It is wonderful watching them come to understand each other as we come to understand them. When Bella gifts Ricky a stray dog for his birthday that he welcomes in with open arms, just like Bella, he thanks her as Auntie Bella. Though their time together is short, they really do come to love each other as family very quickly, which just so happens to very neatly foreshadow the emotional arc that Ricky and Heck will take after Bella dies. Bella's death is a real heartbreak. It's sudden and unpoetic, and you can feel very keenly that this was a story cut too short. Because in a different movie, probably a less interesting movie, Bella and Ricky coming to understand each other better on the farm would have been the whole story. However, Hunt for the Wilderpeople isn't the kind of movie that would just be content to stop there. Instead, after a brief pit stop for a funeral scene which is more funny than it is somber, and apparently inspired by a funeral Taika Waititi attended in real life, which also features what is by far the superior of his two priest roles, the story continues pushing into new territory. Literally. Not long after Bella's death, Heck and Ricky receive a letter from one of the most buffoonishly delightful villains in cinematic history, Paula Hall from Child Welfare. Rachel House, who plays Paula, has appeared in every movie Taika Waititi has ever made, and she is consistently a highlight. Certainly her and Oscar Kitely's scenes together were some of Next Goal Wins' few saving graces. In fact, I'd probably have liked the movie better if they had just cut Michael Fassbender's character and made her and Oscar the protagonists instead. The two of them make for a fantastic comedic duo during their game of cat and mouse with Ricky, and the seeds of which are planted when Paula's letter informs him and Heck that she intends to take Ricky back into state custody. Ricky obviously is not a fan of this idea, but Heck tells him there is nothing he can do. It was Bella who Child Welfare considered to be Ricky's primary caregiver. Heck wasn't particularly interested in being a parent in the first place. Besides, she was the legal owner of the farm as well, so Heck intends to disappear into the bush for a while as he processes his grief, which is an idea that doesn't sound at all familiar because he and Ricky are nothing alike. But he insists that no, Ricky can't come with him, Ricky will just have to stick it out in a new home. Yeah, right. This is the point when that earlier foreshadowing comes home to roost. Ricky fakes his death and once again runs away to the bush in the dead of night, completely confident and totally underprepared. And once again, Ricky proves to be totally ill-equipped to navigate the bush, so just like Bella did, Heck follows Ricky's trail to take him home. However, unlike last time, Heck isn't welcoming Ricky home with open arms, so Ricky won't go willingly. An argument and resulting broken foot leads to them being stuck in the bush together for several weeks, missing the window when Paula showed up to the farm to take Ricky back into state custody. It's only once they start making their way out that they discover that in their absence, Paula has let her imagination run away with her, which leads to both a national manhunt and the funniest joke Taika Waititi has ever written.
Hector Faulkner, 65, and Richard Baker, 13, have been missing now for 6 weeks. Faulkner is Caucasian. Well, they got that wrong because you're obviously white.
So, with the authorities actively searching for them, and the joint realization that their respective criminal pasts would almost certainly lead to them ending up in prison if they were ever to be found, Heck and Ricky decide to head into the bush to hide out together. At least for a little while, anyway. So by now it's probably clear that not only do I like this movie, but I think that it's also well built on a technical level. So far I've mostly talked about the strong construction of the story, but I would say that every aspect of the movie shows that same level of craftsmanship and attention to detail. The cinematography is definitely one of the first things that jumps out as being unusually good. Most family movies are shot competently but conventionally, so you'll rarely find yourself stopping to admire the visuals, but in Wilder People, you do. This movie actively draws your attention to the composition and the framing by being just so gorgeous that it's hard to not notice. Stylistically, it's not hard to see how these nostalgic 80s and 90s influences impacted the visuals. Though apparently Taika Waititi came to a cinematographer when they were still brainstorming with a bunch of examples from Peter Weir movies specifically, they took inspiration from the genre movies of that era more generally, trying to do as much in-camera as possible without too much use of cranes or CGI. Hence those delightfully retro zooms that give the film such a distinct look. Wilder People was shot by the same cinematographer as Next Goal Wins, though I obviously think he did better work in Wilder People. In both movies, he has a really remarkable skill of coming to these kind of gnarly looking, totally unglamorous locations where the paint is peeling and the furniture is decades old, and rendering them into something genuinely quite beautiful. Though that also comes down to location scouting and production design. To hear the cinematographer describe it, the whole thing was shot on location, apart from Heck's shed, for obvious reasons, with them scouting locations while they were shooting and trying to account for the changing weather of the Aotearoa winter. So given that this was almost certainly a somewhat challenging movie to shoot, it makes it all the more impressive that the cinematographer, production designers, and so on did such a good job at zeroing in on a very specific energy. Between the locations and the mise-en-scène, this is a very specifically rendered world where everything is clearly and very well considered. One of my favorite details in that regard is the way that Ricky and Heck's costumes change throughout the course of the movie. Starting with them in very different colors, patterns, and silhouettes, apart from the occasional wool hat to match Bella's whole look, until gradually their costumes grow more similar with them in matching blue and red jackets with knit hats, until eventually, by the end of the film, they're both in matching gray and green. Not to mention Ricky's homemade bone necklace to match Bella's, which is a detail that is so easy to miss. There's a lot of really well executed visual storytelling like that that's easy to miss the first time around that you only notice on repeat viewings, like the occasional cutaways in the opening scenes to Ricky walking around the perimeter of the farm, noting the lack of cell phone signal, and getting back in the car without a word. That kind of joke could have been completely kneecapped in a movie with worse editing, as Next Goal Wins makes abundantly clear. But here, the editing, acting, and cinematography all work together exactly how they're supposed to. To that end, I think it would be a crime if I didn't mention how the music factors into the experience of the movie, because when the music is paired together with the blocking, the cinematography, and the editing, it creates a really satisfying choreographed feel that elevates the scenes even further. The two needle drop montages stand out, and for good reason, because I mean that Cinerama montage is practically euphoric, and the Leonard Cohen montage is really beautifully done too, but I'm specifically talking about the score itself. Like, that opening simply wouldn't be the same without that loud choir and the perfectly timed synthy stings. Though maybe one of my favorite examples comes at the end of the movie, where if you watch with subtitles, you are treated to the absolute delight of this epic car chase underscored with extremely goofy lyrics pulled straight from the script. But I'm getting ahead of myself. After a couple of months of wandering around the bush and successfully hiding out from the police and Paula, Heck and Ricky stumble upon a sick park ranger during one of their routine, if legally dubious, supply restocks. Instead of continuing to rob him or leaving him for dead, they decide to try to get him some help, even if it means risking being discovered themselves. So for the first time since leaving the farm, the two are separated, as Heck opts to stay behind while Ricky heads out on a solo mission back into civilization to go find help. Hence ending the movie's 6th chapter and kicking off the story's 3rd act. This little side quest actually provides a good opportunity for me to talk about one of the structural aspects of the writing of this movie that I find really interesting, which is its use of explicitly delineated chapters with title cards. Hunt for the Wilderpeople is actually an adaptation of Wild Pork and Watercress by Barry Crump, and though I can't speak to how this movie functions as an adaptation in any other respect, I really love the way that it translates the framework of chapter breaks into the medium of film. I find that the chapter as a narrative unit is not often treated all that seriously as a structural element, with many writers not putting that much thought into it apart from just vibes. But ideally, a chapter should work like an episode of a TV show, which is to say that it should be able to stand on its own with its own small conflict and contained arc, complete with a beginning, middle, and end. Then, zooming out, each one of those small contained arcs should help to feed into the larger narrative of the act, and if you zoom out even farther, the story as a whole. This chapter about Ricky's quest to get help being a perfect example of what I mean, with a small adventure that could still stand on its own if you aired it by itself, like an episode of Over the Garden Wall, but it still flows smoothly into the larger narrative by planting some thematic seeds along the way. A lot of the ideas brought up in this chapter have been present in some form woven into the narrative since the beginning of the movie, but this is the first time they get brought into the foreground since shit got real, and they will come to dominate the final act of the movie. Those questions being around Ricky's self-perception, how he feels he fits into the world, and how those things inform the kind of life he can imagine for himself in the future. Ricky has a loud and proud love of gangsters, specifically Black American gangsters, and the whole rap aesthetic that goes along with it. If you look at him and his background, it's not really that surprising. I mean, it's not exactly uncommon for young brown boys to latch onto Black American culture and aesthetics, even if it's not in the same country as their lived experience. And it's not hard to see why Ricky resonates with them so deeply. He sees gangsters as the kinds of guys who have not only experienced the same kinds of rejection from social institutions that he has, but who take pride in it. The idea of the criminal lifestyle has become a facet to his identity both internally and externally. After all, Paula introduces him to Bella and to the audience as a bad egg, complete with his list of crimes before he ever gets the chance to speak for himself. Admittedly though, Ricky is kind of a desperate tryhard. There's obviously a lot of emotional and thematic weight to the way that he uses the gangster thing as a front to seem cool and dangerous, but when Heck cringes at it, the audience does too. A bit. But at the same time, there is something so endearingly, embarrassingly 13-year-old boy about it. It's so stupid and honestly felt. I mean, his dog is named Tupac, for God's sake. So with that as his background, it's no shock whatsoever that Ricky really takes a shine to being a criminal on the run from the law. In fact, this exact scenario has pretty much been his stated life goal since the beginning of the film, completing a prophecy he's had imparted on him seemingly since birth. So it's quite telling that in the scene where he finally is recognized as not just a criminal, but finally, at long last, cool by an adoring fan, is when we finally see the cracks in that facade begin to show. When Ricky stumbled out of the bush, he managed to flag down a friendly local horse girl who agreed to take him home with her so they could call for some help. However, Ricky is a streetwise kid and starts thinking it might be smart if he made a speedy exit before anyone figures out who he is and turns him into the police. But the girl reassures him she's known who he was the whole time. His face has been plastered all over the news, and she doesn't intend to snitch. So, he should take the opportunity to kick back, take a breath, hang out, stop running for a minute. Besides, her dad's a huge fan. So, he does. Ricky takes the rare opportunity to relax for a little bit without worrying about the ever-looming threat of Paula and the police, while fielding requests for selfies from an adoring fan. As an audience, you'd expect Ricky to relish the praise and attention during his interaction with this horse girl's dad, but instead he's uncharacteristically stiff and quiet and awkward. Hasn't this been what he's wanted the whole time? What changed? Well, his environment did. both literally by being in the bush, but also metaphorically. Ricky doesn't talk too much about what his life was like before coming to the farm, but from what little he does say, it paints a pretty bleak picture, featuring neglect and abuse to kids all across the foster system, coming not just from bad foster parents, but from the authorities charged to keep them safe. Particularly when we learn that if things at the farm weren't going to work out, then Paula had every intention to take Ricky not to another family, but to juvenile prison. That was what she was coming to do when she came to collect him after Bella's death. While Bella was alive, Ricky got the opportunity to be more than his list of crimes for the first time in his life. An experience that Heck understood deeply, since for him, it was the same when he met Bella. She gave Heck the space to grow into a whole new person, more than
just a scruffy white drifter who smelled like methylated spirits
he was when they first met, and more than his stint in prison for manslaughter after a drunken fight. Then, later, through each other, Heck and Ricky not only find a deep camaraderie in the similarities of their experience, but also the opportunity to be messy and make mistakes without being condemned. This is where I think you can start to get to the real thematic heart of this movie. If you only look at Ricky's side of the story, it looks like a movie that's only about the failings of the foster system. And while I would say this movie definitely is about that, it's only part of the picture. If you zoom out to both Heck and Ricky as two characters who are more alike than they are different, it becomes clear this is a movie about personal redemption and, to a certain extent, restorative justice. For the people in our society, that our authorities' punitive approach to justice tends to punish instead of help. Heck and Ricky are both people who did some kind of bad stuff in their past, when they were in bad situations. We even see this a bit in the structure of the film. They don't necessarily treat each other very well at the start. However, when they are given the chance to step away from their past and think of themselves in new ways, they not only grow into better people, but thrive. It's clear just how much Ricky's self-perception has shifted when he talks to this horse girl and her dad. Earlier in the movie, when Bella asked him why he named his dog Tupac, he rambled adoring praise about how Tupac was this really cool rapper who's like his best friend, which are now the terms he uses to describe his uncle Heck as the best bushman in the country who he clearly wants to be like. Though at this point in the movie, Ricky still isn't entirely ready to let go of his rapper gangster dreams. Even though he has undergone an undeniable change, he still struggles to see a clear, concrete future for himself outside of that predetermined image. He certainly has his qualms about Heck's suggestions for the future, which are that maybe Ricky deserves the peaceful if mundane life which has so far been mostly denied to him. But Ricky doesn't want that. Not if it means leaving his uncle Heck. Besides, his character arc isn't quite done cooking yet, so he heads back out to find Heck and head back to their joint life of adventure, ignoring the idea that it might ever have to come to an end, even with the police hot on their trail. However, if Ricky is a cringy wannabe gangster, Paula is a cringy wannabe cop. So under her leadership, the manhunt has only been picking up speed and intensity over the intervening months, and has grown ever more militarized as time has gone on. And though Heck and Ricky have managed to continue on with their merry adventure, just the two of them, blithely avoiding the police with only a few close calls, with winter approaching, they decide to hide out with a local conspiracy theorist to wait out the worst of the winter, which is the role with which Rhys Darby makes what feels like is his legally required appearance. At the time, his appearance was basically just an Easter egg for people who had seen What We Do in the Shadows, or I guess Flight of the Conchords for a real deep cut. But now, at this point in parasocial popular culture, Rhys Darby's presence has become the Michael Sheen to Taika Waititi's David Tennant, and I say that with disdain. I mean, why else would they have made Rhys Darby attend so many press events for Next Goal Wins despite him only appearing in what I'd say is no more than 10 minutes of that 2-hour movie? That said, he was strangely overrepresented in the promotion for Wilder People as well, for reasons I can only guess. Was he considered more famous? Simply a charming interviewee? It's hard to say. But I can only imagine the gifts that would be made of them doing promotions if that movie had come out now. What I will say is that even though his role in Next Goal Wins was very small, it was one of the few bright spots of that movie. For at least the 10-ish minutes he was on screen, you could generally be guaranteed that the jokes were going to land consistently. And he is a very consistent actor in general, but he is particularly fun in Wilder People since he's got such a weird little bit part to play around with, especially where these days he's most well known for standing handsomely in front of sunsets on tall ships. By contrast, it was kind of a relief to see him covered in grime being charmingly off-putting in the woods. That said, you won't catch me complaining that he needed more screen time. That time is instead rightfully reserved for Heck and Ricky to bring home some running motifs right before we hit the home stretch, where we see that not only have they learned from each other's skills and worldviews and even started talking alike, but that they have also picked up on each other's creative outlets. Because as it turns out, Heck was all talk when he was complaining about Ricky's reading, and when he asks Ricky to read one of his personal haikus to him, if you look closely, you can actually see his heart melt a little bit. Then, later, we see Ricky drawing a bad but deeply heartfelt picture just like Heck did of Bella at the beginning of the film. But Ricky's picture isn't just of one person, it's of everyone that he loves. His family, even though Heck still won't let him call him uncle. It is therefore somewhat unfortunate that this scene is the exact moment that the police finally arrive. Armed police in helmets and bulletproof vests come pouring out of the tree line and up the hill, and I have to give this movie credit again for the way it is structured and paced, because it is such an insane escalation from two guys walking around in the bush, but somehow, only in an hour and 41 minutes, we've come to this. In an age of 3-hour movies and 800-page books, you've got to appreciate economical storytelling when you see it. It was apparently an homage to 80s action movies, and is a reference to the Barry Crump Toyota ads, hence the name of the car, which I originally thought was just purely an Easter egg about the author of the book. However, I do have to say that the joke while Ricky is hot-wiring the car is probably my favorite callback joke in the movie.
How'd you get this thing started?
The neck.
Then, as the chase escalates, and then escalates some more with an army of police cars and helicopters and then a tank, it becomes increasingly insane to me that everything I can find says the budget for this movie was $2.5 million, which... how? How do you do all that and then flip a car when you're only working with $2.5 million? I have no idea. Though maybe the even better question is how on earth Next Goal Wins cost $14 million when there is nary a tank in sight. Though apparently the budget was so tight that this whole final chase scene was planned out with little toy cars before filming, which is a fact I just really enjoy. It's also scored with the aforementioned ridiculous song, and it's so silly and it's so fun. Ricky has never believed his own hype more, and frankly neither has Paula, and the cutaways to Heck and even Tupac looking on in bewildered horror only serves to elevate it all the more. Ricky evades, swerving between cars and twisting off-road as the tension ratchets even higher, until finally, ignoring Heck's pleas to please not get too carried away, it all culminates in a gloriously anticlimactic shootout that immediately brings everyone back down to earth. Ricky gets caught, Heck gets dragged away in handcuffs, and it turns out that even though she's technically won, Paula isn't the Terminator after all. However, in a surprise twist of good fortune, Ricky doesn't end up going to juvie. Instead, he ends up sticking it out with a new family, just like Heck said he should at the start, and Ricky finally gets to enjoy having a normal life. Heck, on the other hand, is less fortunate and gets sent back to prison. Ultimately, he was right not to expect any grace from the police. They will always see him as a criminal. But Heck's self-perceptions have changed too, and he thinks he can be more than that. So he takes his time in prison learning how to read, so when his year sentence is over and he and Ricky finally meet up again, he recites for Ricky his first ever haiku of his own. A little earlier in the movie, after the death of Heck's dog Zag, they scattered Bella's ashes at the top of a waterfall out in the bush. They knew full well that it wasn't the lake that her ancestors' story described, not least because Bella was as much of a stray as either of them, but they also knew that it didn't really matter. She might have spent her life making up the idea of her family as she went along, building it out of imperfect scraps and spare pieces, but that didn't make it any less real. So when Ricky offers Heck a new home on the promise that Heck finally lets Ricky call him uncle, he begrudgingly accepts. The movie ends with them heading down the hill and back into the bush, at last free to dive into a new adventure on their own terms together. And roll credits. Except, that seems way too easy. You've seen video essays before, you can see how much is left in the runtime, obviously you smell bait. Where am I actually going with this? What's the point that I've been building up to throughout this entire long-winded video? Which, if you'll pardon the theatrics, I will answer in the form of a slightly sanctimonious question that I am nevertheless going to ask you to consider earnestly. Did you, literally any of you watching, happen to notice that through all that time talking about this movie, that not once in this whole video have I ever said the actual names of any of the people who worked behind the camera to make it? Or did you only ever hear me mention the name of Taika Waititi? To be clear, if you didn't notice, I don't blame you. I mean, I only went for this little sleight of hand because I was reasonably confident it would work. And I say that because I am 100% sure that if someone had tried to pull the same trick on me in the months after I first watched Thor Ragnarok, I would have fallen for it too. Taika Waititi's reputation exploded the second Thor Ragnarok hit theaters. His public perception was immediately cemented as the guy who had single-handedly pulled off the miracle of putting real jokes into the MCU. The praise came from both audiences and critics alike. He was a cinematic genius. He was the funniest man alive. He was,
Do you know you fine as hell? You're like one of those guys in high school that don't know that they're cute.
Oh, I know. And I knew back then too.
Certainly in all of those highly complimentary YouTube videos, print reviews, and fan discussions, and even viral interviews with the man himself, the success of the movie and its story was pretty much only attributed to Taika Waititi himself. But that movie wasn't solely popular for its directorial style alone. A lot of people liked it specifically for its story, and that story's humor, and its unique approach to the Marvel formula. And why are we all complimenting him for that? He didn't even write that movie. I mean, he might have added a few lines here and there, but the original script, co-written by Craig Kyle and Christopher Yost, already existed with a lot of its major plot beats before Taika Waititi even signed on to the project. Then, after he was hired and had shown higher-ups the infamous sizzle reel that accidentally pitched a new, more comedic tone, it was Eric Pearson who took over to rework the story and its tone in order to reshape the material into a Taika Waititi film. From there, it was this script that provided the scaffolding for the rest of the project, including whatever dialogue was improvised by the actors throughout shooting, though that widely reported quote insisting that 80% of the dialogue was improvised seems kind of dubious to me now, and it certainly doesn't read well in a post-writer strike world. But you know what movie really calls into question the idea of Taika Waititi, the free-spirited lone wolf auteur? That movie's sequel, Thor Love and Thunder, because he did actually write that movie, and that movie is very bad. Not in the least because apparently what Taika Waititi wanted to do with creative freedom his fame had afforded him was to use the opening minutes of his film to introduce an entirely superfluous narrator character played by him who relayed the details of the story directly to the audience, while every joke landed with a pretty resounding thud, which is so on the nose, it's almost poetic. But what makes it even worse is that he would later go on to do exactly that again with Next Goal Wins. However, weird as his new hallmark is, that is far from the worst crime Love and Thunder has on its record. That award definitely goes to the clip of one of the most obviously tone-deaf things I have ever heard anyone this famous say on camera.
Okay. Does that look real?
In that particular shot, no, actually. It doesn't really, right? When you look close.
You need to be more blue.
Well,
you know,
no.
but does he look real?
No, none of us.
Does she look like...
Something looks very off about this.
Now, I am not going to unpack that can of worms any further. The Royal Ocean Film Society has already done that, and I'm not going to rehash all his points when you could just go watch his excellent video instead. But what I am going to say is that all of these things, when taken together, I think illustrate something that we have all forgotten, though perhaps none of us quite so publicly as Taika Waititi. There is no such thing as a lone wolf genius when it comes to art. Or anything, really. All art is inherently communal. Even just being inspired by someone else's work is a form of drawing on the skills and insights of other people in order to make your art what it is. I may have spent most of my time making this video sitting alone at my keyboard in my room, but I'm not some highly individualistic genius. None of us are, because they don't actually exist. But we all know that this is even more true than usual when it comes to film. Film is a collaborative medium and all that. Movies involve so many people at so many different levels of production, it would be silly to chalk all of that up to the skills of just one person. Obviously. I think I've made my point by now. However, though I have been quite critical of this popular form of hardcore auteur theory, I have to say, I actually have no interest in throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Though movies are collective endeavors, the director is still an extremely important figure in both the creative and logistic process of getting a movie made. It's why it's so common and intellectually useful to discuss movies through the lens of their directors. It's why I have used that analytical framework in the past and will continue to do so in the future, which I don't consider to be ideologically in conflict with anything I've said here. Though we often think of the director's role in very individualized terms, I'd actually argue it's one of the most inherently communal jobs in any movie. They're like the conductor of a symphony. Without them putting in just as much dedicated, thoughtful work as everyone else, the final piece just won't come together in the same way. Like, even if you had similar story elements, even if you invited back familiar actors, even if you called up old crew members from that fairly consistent roster you used to keep across movies, if the director isn't treating all of those people's work as a gift and respecting that gift through equal, if not superior, effort in return, then you're just not going to get the same result. Which becomes especially hard to deny when you publicly admit that you were still finishing the script 3 days before you were set to start shooting, because you are just such a uniquely enlightened being that the movie will still win praise and sell tickets no matter how much you rush it. And what makes me feel a little insane about all of this is that, in a way, though this post is absolutely bizarre and definitely embarrassing, he's not even necessarily incorrect. Because if we're all being honest with ourselves, at this point it didn't really matter how much effort he put into the script or how much talent he squanders. His career is going to be fine anyway. I mean, not his filmmaking career. It sounds like his Star Wars movie has probably been cancelled, and this video took long enough to make that his new Time Bandits show has already started airing, and already has very mixed reviews and a controversy section on its Wikipedia page. So clearly that's going very well. But like, you didn't hear about Next Goal Wins, you probably didn't hear about any of those projects either. Because at this point, Taika Waititi is not really a professional filmmaker anymore. Now he's most professionally known for being the result of some kind of alchemic accident where auteur theory pedestaling mixed with celebrity parasocialism to create the Our Flag Means Death renewal scandal, which is another project that, despite his well-reported minimal involvement behind the camera,
he was doing Thor, but like we would talk occasionally, but not, all in. We maybe talked for like 3 hours before we were in the room about like doing prep to shoot the pilot.
Still somehow got turned into a Taika Waititi star vehicle first and foremost in the popular discourse. Same with Reservation Dogs and every other project he's produced, to the degree that even now, making this video, part of me feels the need to temper that statement and attribute the success of those projects to him benevolently offering his name recognition, rather than to the teams of people who put in the work to make something that resonated with audiences. It's also maddeningly circular. These criticisms are a reflection of him. They're a reflection of us. They're a reflection of the way that though we can pretend all this auteur-first stuff is the antithesis to sterile corporate art, it's really just a new spin on the age-old capitalist tale of picking one person at the top of the heap to venerate while ignoring everybody else. Though, unfortunately, that's not just a special capitalist kind of crap, that's kind of a human problem in general. It's way easier to remember the name of one person than 100. And you're just one person. And it can be so much difficult, occasionally tedious work to understand the mountains of people who are involved in making anything. Especially because the more you dig, the more depth there is to find. And doing all of that for every single show or movie you watch sounds exhausting. So you simply hang all the credit on one person and move on with your life. And I'm not going to tell you that actually you have a moral imperative to do all that extra work. Not everybody wants to make diving into IMDb rabbit holes their new favorite hobby. Like, I am objectively the weird one here. However, what I am going to say is that it's at least good to remember that the depth exists, even if you yourself don't want to go digging. Because then you can make sure that the next time you sit down for a night at the symphony, you'll remember that though there wouldn't be a concert without the conductor, there wouldn't be any music at all without the rest of the orchestra standing on stage with them. Throughout this video, I've occasionally been citing information from an interview with Lachlan Milne, the cinematographer for both Hunt for the Wilderpeople and Next Goal Wins. In it, he briefly talks about what the collaborative energy was like on set, and he described, the electricity of all these people pointing their creative focus in the same direction as feeling like lightning in a bottle. And it has stuck in my head ever since I heard him say that, because I think he's probably right. Hunt for the Wilderpeople just has this unique quality to it. Whenever I sit down to watch it, I always end up rewatching it again multiple times within the space of a few weeks. I'll start out by sitting down to watch it by myself, and it always absolutely lights my brain on fire. So then I'll mention it to somebody else, and they'll suddenly get a hankering to watch it too, and would I like to watch it again? With them, and sure! Then while we're watching it, they'll think of someone they know who would probably like it, and a few days later, all three of us will sit down together and we'll watch it all over again. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Clara and the Sun will be good. Maybe Taika Waititi will be able to claw himself out of the hole he's in, get a good team together, roll up his sleeves, and build up a tall enough antenna during a thunderstorm that he might be able to get lightning to strike pretty close, and that would be nice. But, if he doesn't, if lightning will never really strike in the exact same place ever again, then I am at least very happy that this bolt of electricity was captured when it was, and that it isn't going anywhere. We can all always come back whenever we want and watch it all over again.